Chapter 10, Tariff of Licensed Cabs, 2 francs an hour by Victor Hugo from the book Les Miserables. Marius had lost nothing of this entire scene, and yet, in reality, had seen nothing. His eyes had remained fixed on the young girl, his heart had, so to speak, seized her, and wholly enveloped her from the moment of her very first step in that garret. During her entire stay there, he had lived that life of ecstasy which suspends material perceptions and precipitates the whole soul on a single point. He contemplated, not that girl, but that light which wore a satin pelisse and a velvet bonnet. The star Sirius might have entered the room, and he would not have been any more dazzled. While the young girl was engaged in opening the package, unfolding the clothing and the blankets, questioning the sick mother kindly and the little injured girl tenderly, he watched her every movement, he sought to catch her words. He knew her eyes, her brow, her beauty, her form, her walk. He did not know the sound of her voice. He had once fancied that he had caught a few words at the Luxembourg, but he was not absolutely sure of the fact. He would have given 10 years of his life to hear it, in order that he might bear away in his soul a little of that music. But everything was drowned in the lamentable exclamations and trumpet bursts of Jondrette. This added a touch of genuine wrath to Marius' ecstasy. He devoured her with his eyes. He could not believe that it really was that divine creature whom he saw in the midst of those vile creatures in that monstrous lair. It seemed to him that he beheld a hummingbird in the midst of toads. When she took her departure, he had but one thought: to follow her, to cling to her trace, not to quit her until he learned where she lived, not to lose her again, at least, after having so miraculously rediscovered her. He leaped down from the commode and seized his hat. As he laid his hand on the lock of the door and was on the point of opening it, a sudden reflection caused him to pause. The corridor was long, the staircase steep. Jondrette was talkative. Leblanc had no doubt not yet regained his carriage. If on turning round in the corridor or on the staircase he were to catch sight of him, Marius, in that house, he would evidently take the alarm and find means to escape from him again, and this time it would be final. What was he to do? Should he wait a little? But while he was waiting, the carriage might drive off. Marius was perplexed. At last he accepted the risk and quitted his room. There was no one in the corridor. He hastened to the stairs. There was no one on the staircase. He descended in all haste and reached the boulevard in time to see a fiacre turning the corner of the Rue du Petit Banquier on its way back to Paris. Marius rushed headlong in that direction. On arriving at the angle of the boulevard, he caught sight of the fiacre again, rapidly descending the Rue Mouffetard. The carriage was already a long way off, and there was no means of overtaking it. What? Run after it? Impossible. And besides, the people in the carriage would assuredly notice an individual running at full speed in pursuit of a fiacre, and the father would recognize him. At that moment, wonderful and unprecedented good luck, Marius perceived an empty cab passing along the boulevard. There was but one thing to be done: to jump into this cab and follow the fiacre. That was sure, efficacious, and free from danger. Marius made the driver a sign to halt, and called to him. By the hours. Marius wore no cravat. He had on his working coat, which was destitute of buttons. His shirt was torn along one of the plaits on the bosom. The driver halted, winked, and held out his left hand to Marius, rubbing his forefinger gently with his thumb. "What is it?" said Marius. "Pay in advance," said the coachman. Marius recollected that he had but 16 sous about him. "How much?" he demanded. 40 sous. "I will pay on my return." The driver's only reply was to whistle the air of La Palisse and to whip up his horse. Marius stared at the retreating cabriolet with a bewildered air. For the lack of 24 sous, he was losing his joy, his happiness, his love. He had seen, and he was becoming blind again. He reflected bitterly, and it must be confessed, with profound regret, on the 5 francs which he had bestowed that very morning on that miserable girl. If he had had those 5 francs, he would have been saved, he would have been born again, he would have emerged from the limbo and darkness, he would have made his escape from isolation and spleen, from his widowed state. He might have reknotted the black thread of his destiny to that beautiful golden thread, which had just floated before his eyes and had broken at the same instant once more. He returned to his hovel in despair. He might have told himself that M. Leblanc had promised to return in the evening, and that all he had to do was to set about the matter more skillfully, so that he might follow him on that occasion. But in his contemplation, it is doubtful whether he had heard this. As he was on the point of mounting the staircase, he perceived, on the other side of the boulevard, near the deserted wall skirting the Rue de la Barrière des Gobelins, Jondrette, wrapped in the philanthropist's greatcoat, engaged in conversation with one of those men, disquieting aspect, who have been dubbed by common consent prowlers of the barriers, people of equivocal face, of suspicious monologues, who present the air of having evil minds, and who generally sleep in the daytime, which suggests the supposition that they work by night. These two men, standing there motionless and in conversation, in the snow which was falling in whirlwinds, formed a group that a policeman would surely have observed, but which Marius hardly noticed. Still, in spite of his mournful preoccupation, he could not refrain from saying to himself that this prowler of the barriers with whom Jondrette was talking resembled a certain Panchaud, alias Printanier, alias Bigrenail, whom Courfeyrac had once pointed out to him as a very dangerous nocturnal roamer. This man's name the reader has learned in the preceding book. This Panchaud, alias Printanier, alias Bigrenail, figured later on in many criminal trials and became a notorious rascal. He was at that time only a famous rascal. Today he exists in the state of tradition among ruffians and assassins. He was at the head of a school towards the end of the last reign, and in the evening, at nightfall, at the hour when groups form and talk in whispers, he was discussed at La Force in the Faubourg-Lions. One might even, in that prison, precisely at the spot where the sewer which served the unprecedented escape, in broad daylight, of 30 prisoners in 1843, passes under the culvert, read his name, Panchaud, audaciously carved by his own hand on the wall of the sewer during one of his attempts at flight. In 1832, the police already had their eye on him, but he had not as yet made a serious beginning.